today for the first gubernatorial debate in a primary of the 21st century between two candidates in North Carolina. I'm here in wonderful Gastonia at the Faith, Hope, and Love Community Enrichment Ministries, thanks to Pastor Moses Colbert, who graciously has allowed us to use his church as the venue for this debate between our two wonderful candidates this year. I am Stephen D. Fiore, former candidate myself, and the chair of the Mecklenburg County Party, and I will be moderating this debate for you. To my left, your right, is, well, introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, my name is Shannon Bray. I'm a tech entrepreneur, blockchain advocate, and cybersecurity professional for the United States government. And I am here to promote personal liberty.
And you, sir?
Yeah, I'm Mike Ross, right here in the hometown, Gaston County. I am the treasurer of the Libertarian Party of North Carolina. I'm a financial planner as well as a homeschool teacher. And looking forward to this debate with Shannon, and thanks so much for moderating, Stephen.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So first off, we're going to give all the candidates, both of you, 2 minutes to briefly make your elevator pitch to the viewing public as to why Libertarian voters and unaffiliated voters should choose one of you to be the Libertarian Party standard bearer in the gubernatorial elections next year. So we'll start with you, sir. 2 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. So at the end of the day, Libertarians, I think, are going to have a good choice. You have two Libertarians here having this conversation, but sorry, Shannon, I think that I'm the better candidate. When I look at what's going on within the Uniparty here in North Carolina, it's corporate interests driving everything. To even get somebody on the ballot that would actually advocate for the interests of regular people and fight for liberty, I think that the LP is really the only option. I know the forwards and greens are coming along, but right now, this is the party that I think needs to step up and really represent the unaffiliated voters, because their liberties are getting stomped as well. So when it comes down to it, I am only running for governor really at the request of a libertarian activist. I'm more of an activist, and I think that's one of the big differences between Shannon and I is the way we approach it. Shannon, I think, sorry if it rubs you the wrong way, but Shannon, I think you're a politician. I am an activist, kind of having to play a politician. And the reason I think is because at the end of the day, if we're going to take our freedom and liberty back, it's got to start at the small level. So that's my campaign. I'm going to put forward what I think are common sense libertarian solutions that appeal to regular voters, things that will actually make a meaningful difference in their lives in the areas of healthcare, education, transparency in government. And more importantly, I want to promote a message of local governance. There's a big culture war raging on in the United States and North Carolina right now, and I don't think the government should play a role in it at all. I think it should come down and be fought on the streets with regular citizens, and I think local governments are going to bring this the solution. That's my message, and that's what I hope to do, is inspire libertarians as well as unaffiliated voters to go take over your local town council. There's very low voter turnout. You can have a tremendous ability to fight back against the state and the federal government.
Almost 2 minutes on the dot. Just a little bit over, but you were on such a roll, I had to let you go for a few more.
Thank you for that, Mr. Moderator.
2 or more minutes for you, sir.
So if I heard you right, Mike, and I appreciate you acknowledging my ability to write policy and pay attention, is that you are really just kind of using this as a stepping stone to promote local elections. That's why you're not really coming forward with any real policies or any changes outside the normal libertarian rhetoric. How are you going to get independent voters when you always just stick through the no taxes, government's bad, blah, 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 without offering any real solutions? Not once during that did we talk about healthcare, education, or the economy. So I think those should be the factors that we focus on. But good luck as you continue being an activist.
Well, I hope to address some of those issues in this debate to get your perspectives on health care and,
the economy.
The economy, that minor thing, you know. So let's start with that. Actually, let's start with the economy. Give us a few comments about where you think the economic position of North Carolina is, and what you would do in your position as governor to improve it, and as to why the unaffiliated and libertarian voters of North Carolina should choose you to be the standard bearer for that cause in the election.
Well, there's a number of things that we can do with the North Carolina economy, and a lot of it just breaks down into farming. One of the things that I am against is the war on drugs. And once we legalize marijuana, very much like we've done hemp, we're able to add that as a cash crop to North Carolina. Now, I'm actually against the taxation of it, but with the duopoly that we have, we're most likely going to have taxes that will be used for other state programs. While I don't necessarily support all of those because of the nature of it just being a plant versus the government trying to control a substance for money. But there's a lot of other factors that we have when it comes to the North Carolina economy. We are last in a lot of various areas, including education, even though we have the education lottery. So within our state, there's a lot of holes to where money is disappearing. And ideally, one of the things that I want to do is find where this money goes and then, shut down those programs.
All right. Well, sticking to the economy, my understanding is, Mike, you work in the financial industries as well, so you know a little bit about money and economy. Give us your take, 2 minutes, on what you would do to promote better economic conditions for the people of North Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shannon, that was my opening statement. I couldn't get deep into the policy, but now that we can get into policy, let's talk about the economy of North Carolina. Most people, or at least a lot of them, guys like you and me, we're doing okay. The economy's working for us. We've reached the middle class. But when you look at what's going on across this state, you see all these layers of government getting in the way of the economy, pulling value out of the economy and making it harder for people to elevate themselves from that barrier. Things like, the corporate tax rate. That's one that all of us libertarians are probably on the same page about wanting to slash overall tax rates. But nobody wants to talk about the taxes that really impact the most people, right? If you're doing well, making a couple $100,000 a year, like a lot of North Carolinians, a 5% increase or change in taxes is nice, but let's talk about something like the gas tax. All the ways that comes into the layers, everything that you buy, everything that you sell, baked in layers, and that's a tax that is most regressively hitting the poorest North Carolinians, the ones that the economy is not currently working for. So my economic proposal is look at everything that we are doing as a government, right? From criminalizing things that should not be criminals, that keep poor people in cycles, to layers of taxation that are not as opaque as those. Get rid of those things that are impacting poor people. That will show them that free markets can work for people of lower income. It's just that you've got all these barriers that the government puts away. My goal as governor, if they're going to give me that pen, I am going to strip away everything I can within the government that is holding down regular people and putting their thumb on the scale of the economy to favor big business at the expense of regular North Carolinians. That's my place on the economy. You get rid of all the government interference, the market will take care of it. I have worked with clients who start at minimum wage, and they are in a perfectly good place. Why? Because they understood how the economy works, they made good decisions, and they were empowered, and they stayed away from the government coming in and stealing whatever pile they're trying to build, like they have to some of the people in this venue, right? Caught walking down the street the wrong way, you don't have much to your name. Here's a $100 ticket. Go show up in court. You got to get rid of that at the level. Decriminalization of, cannabis and everything else will ultimately bring about economic prosperity. Just get the government out of the way.
Well said. I think there's a lot of libertarians and unaffiliated voters who would like to see something like that happen in Raleigh. To stay kind of in that thread of economics, you mentioned the war on drugs, sort of, indirectly, and I know you are avidly against the drug war. So why don't you tell the people of North Carolina a little bit about what you would do as governor? Of course, you'd have to, maybe work with the General Assembly or not. But
No.
What are your ideas? What would you do?
I've already done the research, and if elected, I will be the first governor to legalize cannabis by executive order. And I would do that on day one, decriminalize it, and I would do it to a point to where there's no way to tax it.
That's very interesting. Are you able to elaborate on that at all for the curious audience? Or do you have like a policy paper on your website that we could look into that? Because I don't know about you, but I kind of like that idea.
I will make sure that I have something up on that. But yeah, I have discussed it several times. But that's one of the first things that I'm going to do.
Gotcha. And we'll stick on that thread. I'll ask 2 in a row for you, and then to keep it fair, I'll do 2 in a row for you as well. Someone in the audience mentioned the federal government going against menthol cigarettes as a kind of punitive. Going against menthol cigarettes is kind of a punitive measure against people. We can all agree that's probably not the best thing health-wise for you, but as a personal liberty issue, should the FDA or the federal government go in the direction of trying to ban formerly perfectly legal substances, what would you do as the governor of North Carolina to combat what could be perceived as federal overreach?
Yeah, the ban of menthol cigarettes and the ban of really anything, of the vapes and all of that are all gross overreach. By and large, whether or not someone chooses to smoke fiberglass is up to them. Whether you do cocaine, marijuana, opioids, or any of these things, that should be a personal choice. Whether they're medically needed or not, that should also be a personal choice. So these are all things that they're nonviolent crimes, right? And the government might say, well, the person, the kids are selling them to or leaving them behind, they suffer. That's not, those are all just kind of made up stories, just kind of fit a narrative. But oftentimes we're punishing people who are ill, who can't afford medication, and they are really looking for help more than harm. And when we're dealing with things like the war on drugs, I'd like to see something very similar to what they did in Oregon, to where you decriminalize it to a point to where you allow people to get help. But putting new restrictions on stuff that's already been legalized, like menthol cigarettes and vape, that's just the government coming in trying to control us, and I'm absolutely against any of that. Gotcha.
Well, you mentioned cocaine. I hear that's very popular in the White House these days. So, moving on. The same question to you, actually. So this federal overreach, banning menthol cigarettes or other things of the drug war, like what as governor can you do to push back upon the feds to help the people of North Carolina?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, first off, as a financial planner, one of my jobs is to look at data and evidence and come up with a good solution. And here's the reality. I've looked at this in almost every area that the government tries to interfere on. Banning things doesn't work. One, they're never equipped. It doesn't matter what they ban. Some things I think most people agree should be banned, right? Murder. I think we should have a ban on murder and consequences on murder, but it doesn't stop murder. So the idea that you're going to put a ban on menthol cigarettes, what? And if someone has a pack of Newports, you're going to throw them in a cage and make the taxpayers pay for it? It's stupid policy. And I quite frankly, I think one thing that I'd lean pretty heavily on with the war on drugs, because the reality is, I'd love to write an executive order, but the GOP supermajority would just immediately override it or attack things there. So when I looked into it as governor, if I win this race, there's one thing that the GOP supermajority can't do, and that's take away the power of the pardon. So what I would do is any person who's arrested for a menthol cigarette ban, I'm going to pardon them on day one. And the same thing with anything that the government tries to ban that is not creating victimless activities. If the local municipalities don't want to work and they keep want to throwing these things there, I'll asked for a list on my day. Who was arrested for nonviolent victimless activities yesterday? Fantastic. Let's sign all day long. Pardon every single one of them. You do that for a couple of weeks. Good luck finding a sheriff willing to arrest somebody for a pack of Cools. Why waste the resources if they know this person's just going to get pardoned, and then they're probably going to sue us if we escalated to violence in the course of that arrest over that cigarette?
I gotta say, I'm a little worried you're reading my notes, because my next question was going to be about the pardon power of the governor.
I wasn't.
So, but well, that is the next question. So let's go for it. You want to expand a little bit more, like the pardon power as it is? Would you use the existing structure to bring cases to you, or would you institute something kind of new and different?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the power of the pardon is something that's very underutilized by uniparty politicians. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they don't want to upset the status quo. And I think that that's what my whole campaign is about, not only with my messaging to tell people to take over their local governments, We, the people, should control this country. We are a constitutional republic, and when you have these things being dictated from Washington or Raleigh that don't work for the people of Gastonia, the people of Raleigh, or wherever people live, the best thing that we can do is unite as a people and say no. There's no way the federal or state government can attack those things. So if you start local, I want to empower that, right? Anything that we're doing, if we start dropping pardons for everybody who's arrested for possession of cannabis, start there with something that's less controversial. If you pardon every single one of them, how long will it be before every police department in North Carolina says this is not worth our time enforcing anymore? Every time we enforce it, we go through here, we're not even going to get paid on it because the governor's going to come in and pardon them. That's a way to do it without the legislature, and I think the power of the pardon would be very effective. I think I would use it for other things. If someone brings a case here, we have a real problem with and I'm sure it's for later in the debate, but we have a real problem with the criminal justice system. And having
that'll be later in the debate.
And having a governor who's willing to use, willing to use the power of the pardon to keep our states and even our local governments in check is, I think, something that the people of North Carolina desperately need, whether they know it or not.
Now, again, we're to go back to you as well. So the power of the pardon is an important power, only that is squarely in the hands of the governor. So it's an important tool in establishing justice and promoting a sense of reprieve for people who have either been unjustly imprisoned, or even with laws that are in and of themselves unjust. So regarding the pardon power of the governor, where do you see that power as in your quiver of arrows to promote freedom in North Carolina, and how would you wield it?
Well, I think very, very much like Mike, when we're looking at non-violent crimes, and oftentimes with no victim, these people should not be serving any sort of time whatsoever. They all need to be released. A lot of these people were arrested strictly only to drive income for police departments and jails. And if we don't have the arrest records we have, these jails will not stay open. So that there's like the hidden reason of why there's so much crime and stuff is because they go looking for it. And they instigate. And you often see that the cops, I fully support law enforcement, but they should only be doing what they're supposed to be doing. Taking care of criminals, tracking down murderers, finding out who's hurting people and stopping them, as opposed to trying to drive revenue for the state by inflicting damage on families that it's irreversible. And that's kind of what so as a governor, I think is important, like Mike said, it's just to be heavy-handed and letting these people go to show the system that you can make changes.
Gotcha. And you mentioned law enforcement, so we'll have a question here about law enforcement. So one of the things about police officers, not just in North Carolina, but across the country, is that bad actors very seldom get held to account for their misdeeds, partly because of a doctrine known as qualified immunity. This is something that libertarians are, pretty avid about trying to fix and change. It seems like the courts don't have any appetite to rein that doctrine in. So the only fix seems to be legislative. As governor, I'll throw it to Mike first, and then I want to hear your take on it. What would you do to address the issue of qualified immunity in North Carolina that effectively prevents any legal means of redress of grievances when officers of the state essentially violate their oath to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me take it from qualified immunity, but take it even a step beyond. I do not believe that it is right for a government to provide immunity, period. Not for anything, whether it's police officers, whether it's judges, whether it's pharmaceutical companies, whether it's energy companies. Because ultimately what happens is you have a situation where some of the people who are causing the most harm to society, think big energy companies that we find out about a dump in a river, something like that. In many cases, they have been provided immunity by the government, when in a true libertarian world, that immunity could never have existed in the first place, and that company would be held to account up to and including bankruptcy. If they've caused more damage than they have, then everything gets liquidated in return. You can use that to protect the environment, but you got to pull it out of police work. I'm dealing with cases in my activism, right, where you have a situation where bad cops are abusing the public, violating very clearly, plainly written constitutional rights that are, quite frankly, God-given rights, and then being protected by the system, spending tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of our dollars to protect bad cops. What we need to do is minimize the interactions between peaceful people and law enforcement. Stop having them act as they are essentially tax collectors based on these arbitrary rules that some politicians put in place, and they're collecting revenue. You need to minimize those interactions, because the reality is we do need someone to go out there and deal with the rapists and murderers and violent people in society, whether that's community policing that may work in some areas, or formal police force or private police force. Someone has to do that job, but we need to stop asking our law enforcement to go out there with immunity and basically just generate revenue stealing from poor people. We got to put a stop to that, and we got to protect the cops by minimizing interactions, only asking them to go after people who create victims. But you can't have immunity. I think you got to get rid of it for cops and judges, but as well as for pharmaceutical companies, energy companies, and anybody else.
That's very well said. And I can't imagine there's too much daylight between your viewpoints, but I want to hear your perspective, a more politician perspective. What would your approach be as governors for working with the legislature to try to address some of these issues? Or could you just do it by executive fiat?
I don't know if you can get rid of qualified immunity by executive order. If you could, I would love to. I have to look into that. The problem with, to add to what Mike said, because I can't detract from anything, a lot of this happens without due process, right? So you may have a 1, 2, 3 strikes guy, never even has to go through the court process. They've already taken his car, his house, his money, and all that. And then if he's found innocent later, he might get some of it back after years later, right? So, and then you have, like Mike mentioned too, with the pharmaceutical companies, right? We have companies like Pfizer, right? We're just now learning about the harmful effects of some of these COVID vaccines. And because the federal government has given these companies like Pfizer immunity, people don't have an option to sue, right? So you have to take this. They pretty much made most people, right? They pushed very strongly or recommended. They mandated them. And then all of a sudden, if you have issues with the shot, you have no recourse. You can't sue the government. You can't sue the pharmaceutical company because they got immunity. This happens for everything. It happens with pollution companies. It happens with pharmaceuticals. It happens with all across the company, or all across the country. You have all these silos of businesses that have immunity, and all of what the stuff they're doing causing irreversible damage, and no one has to pay. As Mike said, the libertarian model is to ensure that people who damage are held responsible.
I think that's a message we can all really get behind. I want to remind the viewers at home, people who are watching this live stream, if you have any questions you want asked, you send a message or type in a comment into the live stream chat, and it will get sent to my phone here, and I will ask it. So, we want to hear what you want to say. But you're talking about Big Pharma gives me the perfect segue to one of my next questions. You are, in an election, there are the duopoly candidates, the uniparty, but there are two that are kind of making big swaths kind of in the libertarian circle, RFK Jr. and Vivek Ramaswamy, to piggyback on the issue of Big Pharma corruption. What, in your mind, accounts for the energy behind the message that they're saying within libertarian circles? And how, as candidates, can you kind of tap into that here in North Carolina to make a more broad, North Carolina-focused message? And I'll first question to you, Mike, and then we'll add it over to you.
Yeah, I think part of it is the fact that I think most of America, and clearly from the data, most of North Carolina seems to be pretty sick of Republicans and Democrats. They keep tossing power back and forth, and things keep getting worse for regular North Carolinians. So I think when someone sees that idea of an outsider, especially challenging some candidates that are as unpopular as Trump and Biden, right? That's one of the challenges that both Shannon and I have to overcome in this race, and one that you had to overcome when you were campaigning, is everyone's like, you're a libertarian, you can't win. So they see some kind of outsider in one of the parties that they think can win, and they kind of get excited because maybe that person seems slightly less authoritarian, right? At the end of the day, here's what I know. If somehow Vivek wins, if somehow RFK wins, libertarians are not going to see any meaningful move in the direction of liberty versus actually electing literally any libertarian. So I think part of it plays into the sense that they're tired of the status quo. I know I am. I think you probably are, and probably a lot of you, if you're watching this, are too. And I think that both of those candidates have an ability to communicate and seem to be pushing kind of that anti-establishment. Here's the reality. They're not going to make it past Trump or Biden. We're never going to get to vote for them. And in my personal opinion of the Uniparty, they're never going to give you anybody worth voting for. They won't allow it, because if anybody actually believes in returning power to the people or putting people above special interests, the RNC and the DNC will make damn sure that they do not appear on the ballot for you. That's not the case, at least in the Libertarian Party of North Carolina, and I could say that with certainty.
That's a very good answer. Thank you so much for the expansion. To you, Shannon, there is energy in libertarian circles around some of the messages that these establishment, well, maybe they're not establishment, but these duopoly candidates have. What's your idea about, digging into that energy, tapping into it for your campaign, and promoting a message of unity and bridge building in North Carolina?
Well, I think the message that RFK Jr. is currently putting out, he's mentioned a few things on qualified immunity. He's blockchain friendly, very liberty focused. And as Mike said, you're going to get that with any libertarian, but it is nice to see someone wearing the Democrat label actually talking about personal freedom and liberty, as opposed to do what we say or we're going to throw you in jail, right? Even the Democrats who are saying, let's legalize weed. That's not really what they're saying. What they're saying is, let's make it okay for you to buy and sell it so that you can give us money, the state. And if you don't give us money, then we're still going to throw you in jail. So they're not decriminalizing anything. So I love that they're out talking about the corruption with Big Pharma, qualified immunity. So they are definitely, they're definitely my favorite Democratic politicians currently in our current space. Although I would like to see a libertarian at least be able to debate and swap ideas to really kind of see if it's just word service from them or if there's true passion behind there. Gotcha. And I think you're really only going to get that by putting them on a debate stage. But I'd love to share or borrow energy or actually doing anything with those particular campaigns, just because it's not necessarily about who's going to help get me elected. For me, it's about who can I stand behind and what can we do to help just make positive changes. And I think they're both right? I think they're both excellent candidates.
Oh, it's good to hear that perspective. And bridge building and making things better is really what libertarianism ideally is all about, at least here in North Carolina, making our communities better, making our state better. But as a governor candidate, it is unlikely that the duopoly will release the reins of power, especially within the legislature. The General Assembly may still have a Republican supermajority, but maybe it won't. So as governor, what would be some of your strategies, tactics, policies, things you'd want to work with the legislature to get done in North Carolina to improve the lives of North Carolinians, whether the Republicans maintain a supermajority or if it's a divided government?
Ultimately, I would try to appease both sides, right? I know the Republicans are looking for permitless gun carry. I would very much like to give them that, right? And ideally, it would be great if we were able to mix decriminalization from the Democratic side in on that as well, so that both sides are actually getting something they both really want, and maybe not, there's always going to be the gun violence scenario, but when you look at the history of gun violence and most of that's just media spins, right? Yes, there's school shootings, and yes, they're escalating, but people are going to do things with any sort of weapon, right? If they have a gun, they have a knife, they have a truck. I mean, they're showing that they'll do whatever it takes. And so one of the things that I would want to do is help arm our state, making sure that the citizens are able to protect themselves from, just random acts of violence. Because we're not living in a safe world anymore. I mean, you see, if you stop at a gas station, right, you have to look out for some punk kid getting ready to steal your groceries or whatever out of your car while you're filling your gas up, right? Because people are emboldened. They feel like nothing can happen. No one's going to come after them. So they can just treat people any way they want. But people start treating people a lot better when they think they're armed.
What's that old saying? An armed society makes for a polite society.
That's right.
That's the old saying. Well, how about you, Mike? As governor, as someone working for the betterment of North Carolina or North Carolinians, how would you work with the Uniparty in the legislature, regardless of which side holds most power, to get things done for the people of our state?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unlike Shannon, I will not be trying to appease and work with Republicans and Democrats because I'm going to look at the magnitude of what it really means, right? We are a third party. If you or I gathers the 2.3-ish million votes it'll take if we manage to turn this into a three-way race, that is a referendum on Republicans and Democrats by the people of North Carolina. So what I will do is stand up there on day one and say, look, North Carolina, I put forward a series of policies on all of these issues. Some people on the left are going to love some people on the right are going to love some people on both sides may hate some. But guess what? It just got enough to make history and elect a Libertarian. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, Republicans in the legislature, you talk about limiting government. Send me bills to limit government. Democrats, you see that I'm all for police reform and criminal justice reform. Send me bills to do this. Because if you actually look at what it means to have a Libertarian elected, that's a referendum. They're not necessarily just voting for us. They're voting for our platforms. They're voting for our vision. And then we can stand there from the governor's mansion every single day and say, North Carolina, thank you for putting your faith in voting for me. We have made a statement. We have made history. Call your legislators and make them send me the bills that you asked for by electing me. Anything I can do with executive order, I will. I will try to implement it by executive order, but I know that the AG and the government will try to fight that. Hopefully we can have that reality until they win. But aside from that, I'm just going to put it through the lens of pressure and let them know, look, a Libertarian was just elected governor. If you don't start sending me bills that accomplish what the people of North Carolina voted for, I'm going to help elect Libertarians throughout this state until we have a legislature that will deliver for the people of North Carolina if your Republican and Democratic establishment won't do it for us.
Very well said. The next question I had was about the veto power, but I think we kind of sort of covered that. That'd be one of the tools of the toolkit. So I'm going to go to one of the questions here we got from a viewer. How will each candidate handle the tyranny from the NCSHP? So speaking to your issues of or your comments on the government fighting the people, as it were. There's many organizations, bureaucracies within the government that don't really service the people of North Carolina, in our view. So let's start with you, Shannon. What will you do to help rein in administrative tyranny from these institutions, whether it be the the NCSHP, the DHS, the SBI? Take your pick.
Let's ask the guy who works for DHS.
That's the reason why I threw it to you first.
I've worked for the federal government pretty much my whole life, whether it's inside the military or outside the military. And I countlessly see waste. Like, they just throw money. You have budgets, and if you don't use all the money in your budget, you won't get your budget again. So people will spend whatever it takes to spend that money and maybe a little bit more so that they can ask for more money. And that's how government budgets work. So when you start seeing all these little parties and stuff like that just so they can burn their budget money, you realize that there's a lot of wasted funds that are being cycled through the government. And you can't really talk about, downsizing the government without starting with DOD, IRS, and all of these things. They're outside our state scope. But when they're operating inside our state, I believe it's up to the governor to protect the people against federal overreach as well.
Gotcha. Well said. And we'll go to you, Mike. What would you do as governor to, push back against these bureaucracies that seek to impose their will upon the people, whether they want it or not?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a look at the actual one, the one in the question, right? The North Carolina State Highway Patrol, right? I think one of the things, and this is in my platform in the broader scope of police reform, but it starts with increasing accountability. Right now, the laws that the legislature put through are completely backwards when it comes to body camera footage. If you work as an armed enforcer of the government of North Carolina, that body camera was paid for by North Carolinians. And our current process is ridiculously backwards. If you want to see body cam footage in this state, you have to fight to have a judge approve it. And all the DA has to say is literally anything. Oh, it'll hurt their trial. And it'll be blocked. That's completely backwards. Any citizen, if they're pulled over for a speeding ticket, if, I've talked to women who have been sexually harassed by officers, that should be as simple as asking for this body camera footage. If a judge is going to say no, they better have a damn good reason for why they are saying no. But the default should be to release it. And I think that you need to look through every organization, whether it's the Highway Patrol, DHS, or any of these organizations, and find how do we make them more transparent? Because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And whatever you need to do to put safeguards in place to make sure we have enough problem with regular people creating problems in society. If government is to exist, it should be to fix these things. Instead, we have a government that's literally causing more problems. If they're going to cause problems, we need to put safeguards in place. Body cam footage should be open. It should be as simple as asking. You shouldn't have to raise $30,000 and have a legal fight just to prove that you were abused by your government. If there's video evidence of the government abusing people, you need to take it there. And then you need to hold, whether it's the Highway Patrol, a local police department, or any other government agency, you need to expose the corruption, own it, compensate the victims appropriately, and make sure that those people are never put in a position of power where they can abuse it again.
Well said. And more questions are coming in. Let's ask this one. So this is news to me. I didn't realize this. I would be interested to get your guys' take on it. So North Carolina passed legislation to explore buying precious metals and Bitcoin. What are your thoughts and positions on this? Well, I know you're a big crypto guy, Shannon. So what are your thoughts on North Carolina passing legislation to explore, maybe not necessarily buying, precious metals and Bitcoin?
It's kind of a weird question for me. So I'm okay with any government getting into decentralized currency, but it's not really up to the government. The thing about Bitcoin is that it is for the people by the people, and it doesn't have government control. The government may have an interest in it. They may be able to apply pressure at central exchanges. They may be able to make all these laws, but they can't really stop what's going on. Now, there's a lot of countries like Brazil who are switching their money over to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is basically the gold standard for cryptocurrencies. And it moves before everything else does. When it goes up, all the other tokens go up. When it goes down, all the other tokens. So it's kind of the leader in the market. But it also offers a lot of benefit, and not just Bitcoin itself. When we're looking at things when we look at blockchain, for instance, expanding just outside of just Bitcoin, we're able to create systems that are transparent, that you can see how the data flows, what happened. It's immutable, which means it can't be changed. So we can actually use technology very similar to that to improve a lot of our government systems. But having the government stockpile Bitcoin or whatever, I don't really I don't necessarily have a problem with it as long as they're not stealing it from people like the federal government does. You know, when they go in with their raids, they find Bitcoin or whatever, then they'll take it all and they stick it in their bank in California.
You mean theft is bad?
I believe theft is bad. I think that if you own something, you have the right to keep it, and that somebody can't just come in and take it. But, you know, the government has different plans for that. So it's kind of I like to see the state get involved with crypto. It's the future of our world, not necessarily the future of our country, because where I see our country isn't necessarily in government. It's going to be more in technology companies. And so I think we have a huge paradigm shift going over in the next 20 years on who the real power players are. I think a lot of that's going to be dictated by crypto and blockchain. So I don't really, I'll have to go back and read to see what the purpose and the benefits are of what they're exploring. But I do commend them for looking into it to possibly find some benefits. And hopefully it's not with closed eyes so that they're going to try to come in and over-regulate it and stifle it, because they can try to do that. But the people who actually understand the system, you can't control those people. You would only really kind of control the normal people.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that is not for everybody. It is something that, as a moderator discretion, I wanted you to talk a little bit more about, because I find it personally fascinating. But in the issue of fairness, you get three and a half minutes for your take on the matter. From a financial services perspective, the idea that North Carolina is exploring buying precious metals in Bitcoin, what are your thoughts on that? And where do you see this technology going in the future for the benefit, or lack thereof, of the people of North Carolina?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is that I think that the government needs to be out of the money business. We've run into so much problem with the Federal Reserve and this printing of fiat, where you save money when we're at $10 trillion in debt. You build up a nice nest egg, get ready to retire, and then the government prints $20 trillion more. Well, if you look at the actual net effect, you just cut that person's wealth by 2/3, right? It disincentivizes saving and investing. I don't want the government controlling these things. However, there are a few scopes that I think within the functions that the government the government of North Carolina is currently doing. And I had a conversation at the LPNC convention with Falwell when he came to speak on that as our treasurer. He's very anti-Bitcoin. I think that the role that they should have is kind of the same one I use in my practice as a professional asset manager. Gold and silver and Bitcoin are at this point some pretty darn big asset classes that have been around long enough that, you know, for the pensions of the employees and things like that the government's investing, I kind of feel like they're silly there. If I wasn't a libertarian and I believed in force, I could see some potential value there if North Carolina was trying to protect citizens against a CBDC or overreach by the Fed, just printing more money and creating an alternative, say, North Carolina dollar. And if they wanted to back that with a box of silver, gold, Bitcoin, maybe state-owned real estate and everything else, so that North Carolinians had an alternative where maybe you peg it to the dollar on day one, and if the Fed keeps printing and North Carolina starts backing their currency with assets, I think the people of North Carolina would just choose the North Carolina dollar. But again, that's kind of growing government, and I'm really much more in the business of trying to reduce the impact and allow free market currencies to take hold. I think the biggest thing that I would do as governor is try to tear down all of the government barriers that prevent us from being able to use those alternative currencies in the first place. We used to have a choice to use whatever currency we wanted, and if I went to that store and said, hey, will you take my gold backs? Can I send you some Satoshi? The government made that really, really hard, and we need to break down those barriers, because if you do that, people will be able to protect themselves from the Fed and won't need the state of North Carolina to protect them from it.
I think breaking down barriers is something that a lot of liberty-minded North Carolinians and libertarians can really get behind. You mentioned Dale Falwell, the state treasurer. I believe he's running for office as well. But we won't get into that necessarily. But he actually has called the North Carolina healthcare system our cartel because of something called Certificate of Need, appropriately named con laws. So as governor, and this is something that I ran on, one of my issues when I was running for governor. What would you do as governor to address the issue of con laws in North Carolina And just briefly explain how you think, in your view, that those laws negatively impact healthcare outcomes for the people of North Carolina, and then what you could do to kind of remedy that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's in my website, firetheuniparty.com. If you look at my plank on healthcare, one of the things I call for is the abolition of con laws, right? The idea that certificate of need means that you go to your doctor or to your healthcare provider, go through a process, and then you have to wait for some administrator or bureaucrat to tell you whether you can actually get this done or not. And because of this process, you wind up in situations where you have people who are either on Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance that is trying to minimize their costs. You go through this certificate of need process and are told no. Many times against the wishes of the doctor, where the doctor says you want this procedure, but because of these layers of bureaucracy and these, quite frankly, useless and unnecessary and damaging laws, that doesn't get done. We have to pull all of this regulatory environment out of there, especially when you look to some of the rural counties in North Carolina. Here in Gaston County, we're getting a nice new hospital, right? We've got some pretty big hospitals around there, but some of the rural counties, these laws that were put in place, because a particular machine may be 10 years old instead of 7 years old, they're being told, no, you can't do that. So now that particular practice is either the doctor's going out of business because they're not willing to buy this $5 million machine to comply with this piece of legislation, or you're just not getting the healthcare outcomes and you're having to put people elsewhere. Any of these barriers that get in the way of the doctor-patient relationship and any of the things that add needless layers of red tape and bureaucracy are driving up the cost at every level. At the doctor's office, in the hospital, at the insurance company, throughout the layers. You have to get these barriers out of the way. Because you look at what's happened in areas where the government is not regulating healthcare. Think cosmetic surgery. Think LASIK. You have these areas where there's no government dollars involved. And even, to use one since you hit it there, almost any of these markets, the cannabis markets, you look what happened over the past 20 years in these areas where the government's not involved. Prices have come down. If we can just do that in everything, we'd have so much improvement in our economy, our healthcare system. But instead, we're looking at new ways to write new certificate of need laws and occupational licenses and all of these things under the sun that create barriers to entry for new players and ultimately only reward these big mega corporations, big hospital, big pharma, that have armies of lawyers and millions of dollars to fight back against it, and you get no innovation. So I'd look to get rid of certificate of need laws in their entirety, as well as most other regulations that do nothing but add cost to healthcare and get in the way of good outcomes.
The bromide of the Libertarian Party is free markets, free people. To you, Shannon, certificate of need law has been characterized as a cartel by many people, including Dale Folwell. Would you agree with that? And what would you do to bring more of a market freedom approach to healthcare?
Very, very much like Mike, we have the same approach here, where we try to limit barriers and bring the free market and get them involved, because at every layer is of bureaucracy comes more cost. We see it with the con laws. We see it with the VA. We see it in healthcare across the board. So as we try to do the Affordable Care Act and healthcare for all, the government feels like now they have to start throttling stuff down. Everything gets more expensive, and it just becomes a huge cluster. Ultimately, the thing that will help North Carolina the most is for the government to get out of healthcare, and then have the free market take care of that, and then all of these laws are no longer a factor. So one of the things I feel that, as a libertarian, the ultimate goal of becoming governor isn't to do things, it's to undo things. And these are some of the things that will need to be undone.
Gotcha. Goal is not to do things, but undo things. I love that. That's fantastic. Are you trying to get my vote, sir?
I'm working on it.
So
trying to get Mike's vote.
We'll see how that shakes out. A question came in from one of our viewers. Every year, my property taxes go up, but the value of my property, in this sense, a vehicle, goes down. How will you combat that? Shannon?
I would like to get rid of taxes across the board, all property taxes. I think it's a scam that I have a house that I have to pay taxes for every year when I've already bought it. And if I don't pay for it, you're going to come in and take it from me. and then sell it to someone else for like pennies on the dollar just to get whatever I owed you. So you're going to steal my home. Yeah, I'm just not in. Just none of it sounds even legal. I don't know how they can do that.
It's like paying rent to the government.
You're paying rent to the government even though you own it.
Well, then who really owns it, right?
You don't.
How about you, Mike? What are your thoughts on that? What will you do to help that aspect of our broken society?
Yeah, I mean, well, one kind of going back to what it would mean if either of us are elected governor of North Carolina, essentially being a mandate from the people. I think some common sense changes, at least when it comes to, just the regular property tax. Because that's one, most people in the United States pay property tax on their house. There's a lot of states you don't pay property tax on your car, on your boat, on your motorcycle. We do here. I think that we have to look at that and stop. In many cases, especially with lower end vehicles, you're often seeing more paid in property tax over the vehicle than the initial purchase price of the vehicle, especially when you see late model cars that are starting to change and you have these fixed fees. I think we need to do away with that. And we should probably talk about tackling the fees that are basically just taxes disguised as something else. But, the registration fee that we're paying. Why can't we pay that every 5 years, every 10 years for the life of the car? Or at least until, you buy a brand new car, at least till the warranty's over where all that stuff's being covered. But again, I think that comes down to what I view as the evil of the state, and the reason that it's able to keep poor people poor is you have these layers of things that come in. And again, the millionaire, does he really care if he has to pay, an extra $50, $75 on a car every year? No. But that single mother who just got her first car and is worried about how she's going to change the oil in it before it becomes a real problem, who's having to pay that, those are the people who suffer from these things. So you have to do away with those. If you don't, you're never going to allow economic freedom to be an opportunity for these people. And when you look at what the government's doing, they're moving more and more towards these ideas of socialism. And that's one thing. I have a lot of friends on the left. I am very much anti-socialism, anti-communism, because I know what it ultimately leads to. As soon as we switch to a system where everybody is getting something from the government, that's what every campaign comes for going forward. That was my big hit on the Forward Party with UBI. As soon as UBI becomes the law of the land, that's the only thing politicians complain on. Vote for me, I'm going to give you more money. I'm going to increase your UBI. Where if you do away with that, I believe that true free markets will elevate people better than government can, better than socialism can. And I think that what we need to do is get all the government barriers out of the way that are stopping people from realizing that. Because if you see real change in that person who you thought, boy, they've got a really bad financial situation, and you take all those barriers out and you look over and you're like, wow, they've elevated themselves to the middle class. Now more and more people are going to realize that that's possible. The problem is the government has put so many barriers in there that what should be nice and easy is incredibly difficult for regular people.
What was it that Margaret Thatcher said about socialism? Problem with it is eventually you run out of other people's money. So speaking of other people's money, another question has come in from our viewers. What are your opinions on the new sports betting law that will go into effect in 2024? Shannon.
I don't know the law that's going into effect, but I am open to, I think if you want to gamble, I think you should have the opportunity to gamble. It's your money, your time. If you have a problem, then that's something that is on that individual. I don't think that we need laws to try to keep these, to kind of control all of society when these people are going to go out and gamble anyway, right? They're still going to go out and, go to Vegas or, you've been able to sports bet on the internet now for over 20 years. So it's not like it's coming new to the state. But yeah, I think that people should have the right, as long as they're not hurting other people and taking someone else's stuff, that they should be able to do what they want.
Don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. That's the Libertarian Party elevator pitch right there. What about you, Mike? Your thoughts on the new sports betting law, if you have anything to add?
Banning things doesn't work. I think that it's common sense. We tried to ban it. It didn't take much to fire up your VPN and say you're in another state to do whatever bets you wanted in the first place. At least now it's creating opportunities for North Carolina business owners. I'm just wondering why we waited until now. Stop banning things that don't hurt people.
I hear that they're trying to ban VPN now.
Yeah.
I heard the same thing. It's
Good luck with that.
Politicians, they know how technology works. Am I right? If you're a millennial like me, you know the whole like, oh, video games will turn people crazy. Yeah, well, maybe I'm here.
Yes.
So, another question from our viewers: what will you do to protect LGBTQ rights, or really the rights of people in general? But this specific question was for that specific group. But your thoughts on that? What you'll do to protect the people of North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think my track record as an activist says that I'm going to protect everybody's rights, period. And when I look at that, that's something that the LP has, we were in 2008, we were the only mainstream party in the United States that was okay with gay marriage. Obama was elected his first term opposing gay marriage. Here's the reality, and I wish my solution would happen. How about we get the government out of the marriage business entirely? Why do two consenting adults who want to choose to spend their life together need the government permission? They're perfectly capable of having a relationship with just themselves, their pastor and God, with whatever. Get the government out of it entirely, and then there's no ability for a radical, group that may have control over the state to try to go back there. Because I know there's some hits there in North Carolina where they're talking about, going against and banning gay marriage in North Carolina. As governor, I wouldn't allow that. But again, I'd much rather see we completely get the government out of this process. It's something that the government never should have been involved in the first place, in my opinion. But I would absolutely say, any two consenting adults who want to get married in the state of North Carolina will have no pushback from me.
Well said. Shannon, what will you do to protect the rights of the people of North Carolina as governor?
That wasn't the question.
Oh, you're right. The question was specifically, what will you do to protect LGBTQ rights? That was the question.
Yes, I believe that the LGB community should have the same exact rights as everyone else. They should be able to vote. They should be able to do everything they need on a daily basis. And no more, no less. Adding the TQIAs to the mix, I don't believe that there is any right whatsoever to play sports at the high school level. So I feel like that question is asking what side of the line would I be on there, and I would not allow a male to get on a sporting field, a biological male to get on a sporting field with a girl and compete against her and possibly hurt her. Because we've seen the damage in MMA, we've seen it in soccer, we've seen it in all sorts of sports, right? Now it's Riley Gaines and swimming, and the reason why this is kind of, people often say, well, this is how they feel, and if I don't allow them to do that, then I'm a bigot. When I totally disagree with that. I should never have to tell a grown man that he shouldn't have to play, that he has more physical strength than the women that he's competing against. Like that swimmer who, took the dreams of those women that had studied that had pursued swimming their entire lives. He shows up in a second, steals and I use that word, steals their accomplishments, and I'm against that because, as you know, I'm against people who hurt other people and people who take things that don't belong to them. I feel like that fits into that bucket. I don't feel that anyone's feelings should come into law. We've never done that, ever. Right? We don't have a constitution that just says, oh, depending on how you feel, the Second Amendment may or may not apply to you. They're trying to do that, right, with red flag laws and things like that. But it all comes down to, we have a system of facts, right? You can't just come in and say, hey, I'm going to mix everything up, and then everyone just has to accept it. That's not where I'm at with that. If someone wants to do whatever they want to do, they're more than welcome to do it. But I don't believe special privileges should ever be warranted. I do not believe that there are more than two sexes. And anything that says that other than that is just wrong. I mean, it's an uneducated statement, and it just doesn't make any sense. So I just wanted to be clear on that particular question on what I thought it meant.
I understand. Yeah, it's a culture war issue that a lot of people feel very passionately about. There's no one viewpoint within the Libertarian Party as far as I know. But again, Shannon brought up issues that I didn't bring up to you. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that additional information?
Yeah, I mean, I make it an intentional case to stay out of the culture war. And one of the reasons for that is one, I think it's the duopoly or uniparty's greatest tool, right? If you're able to get something that people are emotionally charged about and divide them over it, you're now creating an enemy in your neighbor as opposed to the true enemy, which is the uniparty that's oppressing all of us from the start. When it comes to those issues, I've leaned on this statement a lot, Shannon, in this debate. Banning things doesn't work. Now, if you're looking to see a change there, because I'll be honest, I've watched a trans woman MMA fighter destroy the face of a biological woman, and watching it was hard to watch. And I look at that and I say, that shouldn't happen. But do you know how that shouldn't happen? We shouldn't need the government to tell us that shouldn't happen. That organization, the UFC, or whatever private organization is running these events in sports, it's their call. And if they are in a community where that community is so outraged that they don't want to support that sport, that's the free market at work. But if they're in a community where they know that everyone's watching the sport only wants to see biological women or biological men competing there, they set the rule. They don't need the government to do that. The free market can solve these issues, and I think the free market should be the one who's truly battling the culture war, not the government. I don't want the government tipping the scales of the economy. I don't want them tipping the scales of the culture war. I don't want them tipping the scales of anything else. Let the associations that run the sports make those decisions. If they make a bad decision and their communities and customer bases are upset, great. That's the free market working, and that would be my solution.
Your governor, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have state resources that apply to you, right? What are you? You're just going to do what?
I mean,
so when you have schools of children, right, and you have a trans athlete who wants to compete against women, how is that beneficial to anyone?
Yeah, well, I mean, since we're going to break format here, and we haven't hit on education, I think that my education plan actually covers that answer, right? Because your education plan puts forward a bunch of things that you want to see the government do, right? Or I saw your tweet where you called for smaller classroom sizes and things like that. If you were to look at my education plan, which is not Republican light, because I mean, I get you like school choice, but the North Carolina GOP is pushing school choice. I see that as a real threat to the future of education in North Carolina, because all you're doing is setting up a future government takeover of private education. If you went with my education plan, which is to equitably distribute that and give the parents full control, if their local school was doing something like that they didn't like, they'd pull their kid from the school, the free market would be working, and guess what? If they did that too much and pissed off enough parents, that school would stop existing. Free market, solving that problem, no input for governor needed, other than breaking the monopoly on education, which is something that I hope, whichever one of us wins, that's a message we can hammer to whoever's there. Because if we don't break that monopoly on education, you're only setting up future generations to continue to be propagandized and shifted in the way that the government wants them to be. Right now, it might be these culture war issues. In the future, it's something else. But we need to put control of the education of North Carolina back into the hands of parents, and not in a way that sets up the future takeover of private and homeschool education.
Education is an issue that a lot of libertarians, a lot of North Carolinians are very, very concerned about. And as a governor of North Carolina, it is in the state constitution that some kind of education has to be provided. So you talked a little bit about your plan for education. Shannon, why don't you share the viewers with your thoughts on education? What's the proper role for education in North Carolina, and what will you as the governor do to help provide that, or not get in the way of people finding the right option that's best for them?
Yeah, so our education is outlined in our state constitution, Title IX, where it lays out the school boards and all of that. I've looked at that several times, and to be honest with you, I'll give Mike credit. We were kind of talking a few weeks ago about school choice and education. We actually talk a lot about quite a lot of things, and I was looking at trying to find a way to get legislation to maybe abolish Title IX. Mike thought that we could still maybe get school choice to fit inside there, inside that particular one. As he said, just to kind of go with his response, I do have more of a Republican-like view on education. And that's primarily because a lot of my views are libertarian, and some of them are extreme libertarian. But I also feel like I need to get people closer to libertarian without feeling like they are just letting go of the wheel. Education is one of those things. So I would like to have parents have the ability to use the vouchers or school choice and make sure that their students or their children can go to the education systems that they want. That also does address, the LGBTQIA issues. If there's schools that you can choice yourself into or out of, but you're right. Smaller class sizes and teacher pay and all of that are in there, but they're in there because not because I want more money to pay for them, but because we have the education lottery. We have all of this money in education. We're one of the states that spend more on education, but yet we're 47th. So we have wasted money somewhere. So ideally what I would like to go in is go through our education system with an army of libertarians, to be honest with you, right? Because you won't get a group of, oh, you don't need that, or oh, this costing too much money, than you will to have someone who are looking things judgmental, right? Give me a reason to keep this in place, right? So we'll have people like that on the team to try to figure out what works and doesn't work and to try to clean it up. But it is more Republican because it's a transfer from, I think, where we are now to a libertarian utopia, but I don't think we can get there without the structure.
There's a big tent within the Libertarian Party. A lot of people are, they come to us with views that are kind of left or kind of right, and we kind of all coalesce around some core principles of freedom of choice and freedom of opportunity. But it is all about discourse, discussions, and bridge building. You guys say that you guys talk to each other on issues. What other duopoly candidate would talk to his opponent, as a fellow American or as a fellow candidate, So one of the things that libertarians do a lot is discuss and argue, and the old saying, iron sharpens iron. What will you do to bring that sort of a cultural aspect of the libertarian ethos into the general public of, fostering this idea that we can talk about things and, even not agree on them, but still kind of come together as a community to, see if we can figure something out? We'll go with you.
Yeah, I think it plays to kind of how I opened, right? I'm running for governor. It's a statewide race. For a number of reasons, all of them which I think every libertarian candidate came before me, right? Keep ballot access, try to push the major parties in the direction of liberty on policy. But I think that the real solution there is localism, right? We are having this debate on my home field. I have conservative friends, I have progressive friends. Here's the reality. At the local level, if you get to know your neighbors, regardless of what you may disagree with them about, it's much easier to have those conversations because you're coming at it from a position of good faith. So I think if in line with kind of my bigger vision of how we fight our way out of the tyranny that we see as North Carolinians, you push those conversations local. We don't have to have agreement on who we think should be president or even governor, but if we can get together and say, hey, our local police department beating up homeless people is bad. Maybe we should come together and put a stop to that. Hey, there's a private entity that has private property and it's doing something to help people. Sure, maybe some people are complaining about it. Who cares? Like you have to say we have a constitution, it's the law of the land, and if you come together within your small group in your community, I've seen it with this campaign. I have people who were formerly Republicans, formerly Democrats, unaffiliated, progressive, conservative. If you operate in good faith and have good faith discussions and come to the stance of, hey, we both want the same thing. We may have different opinions on how to get there. It's almost impossible to facilitate radical change at the federal or state level, but it is very possible at the local level. And that's where I think single issue coalitions around what's important for local communities, and then using weapons that are enshrined into the structure like nullification. Have local governments use that as a pushback to fight back against state, federal overreach. But all of that bridge building and all of that coming together, if it's not being done organically at the local level, you're not going to break that. Why? Because the Uniparty has invested billions and billions of your dollars into creating a system that upholds that division. It's the only way that they can keep power. And we're not going to start a revolution all at once between these 350 million people in America. However, in a small town like Gastonia of 80,000, or a small town like mine of Cramerton of about 4,000, those are the ways that we can build it and fight back. And that's what I hope to inspire with my gubernatorial campaign after I beat you in the primary, Shannon.
Oh, big words from candidate Ross over here. Well, Shannon, building coalitions and bridge building and being a uniter, not a divider. These are all important things that a lot of people say they want in politics. We'll see if people vote that way for a change. But as governor, as a candidate, where do you see your position is with regards to fostering that kind of discussion?
Well, I don't think you're going to have a candidate or a governor that's more willing to work with both sides than a libertarian, because there's so many principles that we share with both sides. There's also so many principles that we don't share with them, which makes us, and we don't compromise on those. We'll never say, yeah, that's great, but they're going to lose some of their personal liberty when we give them that. You'll never find a libertarian saying, oh, yeah, we're going to sign up for that. So it's more about, I get what Mike's saying from the bottom up, but it's so hard to get good candidates that are running statewide that can articulate what they're trying to do, when we are in a uniparty and every year is, this is the election of all elections. You were in the election of all elections last time. I was too. I'll be in the next one.
Every year is the most important
election.
Every election.
And they do that, right? They do that to isolate the third party, whether you're Libertarian or Green Party or Forward or whatever, right? They use that as a control mechanism to silence us. And if once we're able to break through that, I think then we just kind of go into undoing mode, right? Because as Mike's right, in order to foster change from the bottom, you get people elected and kind of push up. But if we can get a guy in there, undoing the injustice can be equally as powerful. And then that can just be one of us. It doesn't have to be me. If Mike gets elected and I don't, I know he's going to do it. I know he's going to undo stuff. If I get elected, he knows I'm going to undo stuff. This is just, you would undo stuff, right? This is what we do. We look for things that are holding people down. We look for things that we don't feel is right, and we try to find solutions around them.
There's a comment from one of our viewers. It's more of a rhetorical question, but I think plays to this sentiment. We often see two duopoly candidates we don't like on the ballot. What do we do when we see two candidates we like on the ballot in the NC primary? Well, I'm sure a lot of North Carolinians will be able to see two people they actually like for a change, which is pretty slick, I think. Changing gears just a little bit, there's a lot of energy in this discussion. A lot of people are really animated about it. So I'm going to talk about energy. See that segue, viewers at home? Someone from the audience has a question. Where do you stand on oil rigs off the coast of North Carolina? Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my stance, and this is one that's covered on my website, firetheuniparty.com, when it comes to the environment, and it all touches kind of back on the first thing. We have to get rid of immunity. Energy is needed. If you look at the current situation, if we were to, Thanos snap everybody into having a Tesla, we'd all have no power, right? That's the reality. Right now, we are not able to get away from oil. So while it's there, and until we transition to where we don't need oil anymore, I think that we should be drilling, especially more than we are, doing that there. That's the free market. If we need something and we want to pay for it, we should buy it. However, you have to destroy the immunity in those cases, because if an oil rig has some kind of problem and it's now coating our beaches in oil, it's an absolute travesty and a crime that, in my opinion, borders on treason to allow that to happen and then tell that oil company, hey, we're going to cap your damages at X million dollars, which is a rounding error on this, multinational corporation's budget, and the people of those beaches are suffering. So I think as long as it's done in a way that protects the environment, protects the people, and creates no liability protection, so if they go in there and do this and then have to get hit with billions of dollars in fines, and if we see that, and you're looking to do that and put a community at risk, I don't care what the insurance costs, you better make sure that you got the insurance to ensure that those communities are cleaned up. And I think that that's one role that's there, is how we can protect the environment, is not through things that don't actually benefit us, like carbon taxes and things like that. All that does is allow the big companies that can afford it to pay them, the little companies that may come up to try to innovate, to not even enter the field because they're afraid of one little violation putting them out. If you do away with the immunity element and require anybody who causes some kind of an environmental disaster to be held fully accountable and pay real damages to every single person and community they harmed, I say, yeah, drill away. But drill at your own risk and make sure you probably have the right insurance, or you won't have a company as soon as you have your first mistake. And I think that that's the role that we need to play in. And if we're going to do that, I certainly don't want us granting liability to those companies that are drilling. And I'd say if we're going to grant them liability protection, no. So
Drill, baby, drill, unless you mess up, and then straight to jail. Where do you stand on the oil rigs off the coast of North Carolina?
Ooh, I would hate them. But for different reasons. I grew up in South Louisiana. Oil rigs all over the place, right? The water, as soon as you hit the Gulf, is dark and murky. The BP oil spill 6-7 years ago killed massive amounts of wet life, hurt the families of a lot of the friends I grew up with, destroyed the economy. As Mike said, their bill was capped, right? They didn't have to pay all of the damages. Same thing happened in Alaska a few years before that. So they happen every several years, and the reason why I'm against it is because they do have immunity. So without that, I think I could kind of be on where Mike is, but I don't think we would ever give the oil companies, hold them responsible because of the money that's flooding into politics. But yeah, I think it's an eyesore. I think it would, ultimately hurt our state as far as some of our economy with Outer Banks and all of that. But, if you put them out far enough and they're safe enough and it's not causing any damage, then it's a little different story.
Gotcha. Well, we got 7 minutes to go, so I'm going to rapid fire 1 minute response for everyone to get some of these questions in. How do the candidates view ranked choice voting? Shannon.
I like it, but there's also other options for voting that are equally as impressive. They're all better than what we currently have. So I would like to see ranked choice voting get more traction because I think it will help with a lot of our issues. In Georgia with the Senate race, they have a runoff and then they turn around and they go spend all this money again for a whole nother election. That's massive amounts of money. Billions, right? If they're just looking at ranked choice voting, then they're saving all of that money. The candidates are not requiring to take all this money from the people that they're trying to support. So I think ranked choice voting is definitely one of better options going forward, although there are multiple.
Gotcha. Same. What about you, Mike? What do you feel about ranked choice voting?
I think ranked choice voting would be a very great step in the direction of giving power back to the people. I think there's a lot of changes to the voting system that can do that, but right now ranked choice voting has the steam. So if we could get ranked choice voting in North Carolina, 100% on board.
Gotcha. You mentioned steam. I'm going to ask a question about energy. It's been said the most catastrophic way to boil a kettle of water is with a nuclear reactor. What are your views on nuclear energy in North Carolina?
I mean, I think if we're serious about wanting to transition to a non-fossil fuel-based energy source, nuclear is the only one that makes mathematical sense to do what we need it to do. So this war on nuclear is really, in my opinion, it's a ban that does nothing but benefit big oil. I mean, if you look at some of the things that are being done where they're retrofitting coal plants into nuclear plants because a lot of the structures are the same, I think those are the kind of things that we need to be doing, because I think the time away from it has really been detrimental to where we could have been if we never kind of pumped the brakes on nuclear energy.
Doesn't help that it takes 20 years to build a plant because no one knows how to do it anymore. Shannon, what are your views on nuclear energy in North Carolina?
Before I was a diver in the Navy, I was in the nuclear power program. So I went to the nuclear power A school and really kind of got to learn everything from 1 + 1 to splitting atoms. Now, the nice thing is nuclear power, especially under the control of the United States Navy, has never had an accident. The safety protocols are extreme. Under those conditions, I am in full support. Now, if we flip to the opposite side, our friends in Russia, they have their submarines are much quieter, but they have less shielding, so they get a lot of radiation damage.
It'd be good for oncologists.
So it really depends on, there's some areas that I'm like, we don't need all that kind of regulation, but when it comes to nuclear power,
yeah,
everything has to follow to a T. But I think it's beautiful.
So how will you fight to get into the North Carolina gubernatorial debate to really take the duopoly to task? Shannon.
Well, we're working on that right now, right? We're trying to, this is the first primary that most people have seen for Libertarians, because typically you just have one Libertarian run for one office. They go with no contention all the way to the end, but then nobody even knows that they're there. The Republicans and the Democrats are having their primaries, they're fighting, they're getting news time. You're sitting up there just kind of waiting to see what's going on. And then when you get up there, then you're kind of included, but everybody's like, who's this Shannon guy, or who's this Mike guy? So the first thing we're trying to do is bring our primary out to where people are interested in early. To be honest with you, I've ran 2 campaigns before and never assembled a staff. I did everything myself. This is the first time I've ever assembled a staff, because this, I believe, is the opportunity for a third party to get in there and make some serious changes.
Serious changes are why we're here.
That's right. Yeah. And I feel like, especially Mike, I appreciate his character, how hard he works, and we agree on a lot of stuff. But there's some things we don't disagree, or that we slightly disagree on. But the fact that we get to go out and we get to talk about those differences helps other people understand what those differences are, right? And then it gives them the ability of, maybe some people don't like my education policy. Maybe it is too Republican. Well, that gives you a great Libertarian candidate like Mike to put your support behind. Or if you're like, that's, I kind of want a little more structure and just not want to go, throw the education right out the window at the beginning, then, maybe I'll vote a different way. But the nice thing is we have that dialogue, and I think together we're going to be stronger even as opponents, very much like Matthew Ho and I were for the Senate race.
Having conversations and showing that kind of conciliatory attitude is something a lot of people really like. Mike, how would you fight to get into the North Carolina gubernatorial debates to really take the duopoly to task?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take this, and sorry, Mr. Moderator, and sorry, Shannon. If you want that to happen, if my calculations are right on some math, if about 300 to 400,000 of you show up and vote in this primary, it's enough of the electorate that they'll have no choice but to take us seriously. So come vote for us in the primary. And again, 300,000 to 400,000. If we can get that kind of turnout in this primary, it's enough of the electorate based on Republican and Democrat primaries that they will not be able to ignore us. If they can't ignore us, they will have to debate us. And if they have to debate us, we will show you that libertarian principles are better for the people of North Carolina and neither Robinson nor Stein, because let's be honest, that's who we're going to be running against. Neither of them will be able to bring coherent answers to why these things are better for you. They're just going to double down on bad policy because that's all Republicans and Democrats have.
Well, I can tell you as a former candidate myself and a politician, there's nothing politicians crave and covet more than your vote. So, yeah, use it wisely. Well, we're going to move on to closing statements now. You opened up the statement, I believe. So, or wait, who? Do we remember?
I don't know.
You know, I'm left-handed, you're to my left. So, closing statement, Shannon Bray.
Our state has been in turmoil with the leadership of our Republican and Democratic leaders. We need real change in our state, and we're not going to get there with the same politicians that have been serving us. We're not going to get there with the same methodologies that have been serving us. So it, I believe, is up to North Carolina now to finally stand up and say we deserve better, and we're going to vote our principles outside of voting who we think are going to win in the duopoly. And I think as more people start to trust their instincts and realize that the government is hurting them more than helping them, then they're going to see candidates like Mike and myself and the Libertarians that we're running on down ballot with. All of them, you know, have similar passions that we do. So it would just be great to, you know, just to continue sharing that with people.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Shannon Bray, for coming out and sharing your candidacy and your viewpoint with the viewing public. Mike Ross, closing statements.
Yeah, first off, to everyone listening and caring about this Libertarian primary debate, thank you. I hope you'll vote for me. But at the end of the day, you have two Libertarians here. I think both of them represent Libertarian principles. But at the core, I think this is going to come down to you having two great choices, one of which is an activist, and the other I will lovingly call a Fed. Only because it's accurate, everyone. But at the end of the day, we need to start something at the bottom up. The governor's race is an important way to get that message across. And when it comes to that race, we need to cover all the bases. And I think that I'm the candidate there because I promise you, if you look at my track record of activism, I don't care if someone is left, right, center, believes anything, whether it's common, I am going to stand up for your rights. My activism has proven it. People who didn't think I was going to stand up for certain things, guess what? If I see rights being violated, I'm going to stand up. The same tenacity I use as an activist will transition to time in Raleigh. I will be an unrelenting advocate for decentralizing power away from the government and into the hands of the people. And my entire campaign I will be promoting for not only me, but other activists, citizens. Stand up in your local communities. Become the mayor, become the city council, become the sheriff, become the judge. Take the power back through the political system. It's going to take a revolution. It took one the first time we got our freedom. Hopefully we can do it without guns this time and using the vehicles to get together with our communities. And I am honored at the opportunity to be the Libertarian candidate to take that message and then empower those local communities with the power of the pen at the governor's office.
Mike Ross, thank you so much. And if the viewers at home can't see, it's the copy of the Declaration of Independence on that shirt there. Thank you, everyone, for showing up.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
I am honored and humbled to be your faithful servant in this regard. If you had a question that wasn't asked, written copies of it will be provided to the candidates, and then they will get a written answer for you, and we will post it either in the comment section on the live stream or somewhere on the Libertarian Party website. That's lpnc.org. That's lpnc.org. I want to thank our candidates. I want to thank our guests. I want to thank the people who are viewing at home. And most of all, I want to thank Pastor Moses Colbert and the Faith and Hope and Love Community Enrichment Ministries for allowing us this wonderful venue for this conversation. Thank you very much. And, let freedom ring, folks.